dystopian fiction has been moved to current affairs.
Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of Dystopian Fiction Has Been Moved to Current Affairs. Welcome to the first episode of 2024. I'm Claire, and I'm here with my co host Masha. And this episode, we're going to be talking about the film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as it hits its 20th anniversary. From
Crazy.
2004. It is crazy, yes. It's crazy for me because it makes me very, very old. Yeah,
Sorry, I think I've just
that's
ruined
worth
that.
sneezing at. No, that's all right. I can cut your sneeze.
I
will
was
cut your
really
sneeze.
trying to hold it
It's
back.
all
I
right.
was like,
Don't worry.
oh my god.
It's easy. I can
Okay.
mute out a sneeze on your track. It's
Fine.
fine. We chose this, I think, because we know that 2024 has the potential for being a really grim year.
Yeah.
From the perspective of some of the things that we talk about. There's been lots of sort of discussion about the rise of authoritarianism, and we've been discussing it in our podcast episodes for a lot of things, but it's of course happening in the world as well. And 2024 has the potential, it's the year of tons of elections. It has real potential for the rise of populism across the world, but also specifically the potential for the return of Donald Trump in the US election. So we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about a means for forgetting everything like Donald Trump in this film. So, Masha, would you like to tell us all about what this film is about? You get the hard job.
Really great film. So it follows the story of Joel and Clementine, who are this couple who go through a breakup and then undergo a procedure to basically erase each other's memories from, the relationship and about each other. And the sort of film specifically follows Joel's experience of getting his memories erased of his ex, and I guess it's sort of the movie dapples in like non-linear storytelling, even with sort of, it goes back in time from the end of the relationship, I'd say, to sort of the beginning, although it does sort of very much jump around in the dreamlike sequence. But there's lots of sort of explorations of like themes of love and memory and sort of experiences. But yeah, no, I'd sort of say that's like the main sort of plot line of the film. But no, I think there's lots to say about the ending, but maybe we'll talk a bit more about that later.
Yes, the ending and also the beginning, because they're kind of the same thing.
Of course, exactly. I literally completely forget. It's just so very clever. And also, we were just saying how it's quite, even though it's 20 years old, it seems like quite a timeless movie.
It
anyway.
does, absolutely. And with the odd exception, we tend to talk about sort of slightly bleak films. This is, people describe it as a sort of speculative romantic comedy, or science fiction meets romantic comedy. It's not romantic comedy in your sort of, sort of traditional kind of gushy sort of vein, but it does have that little vibe to it as well, which is nice. And it's a film written by Charlie Kaufman, so it's got that really kind of like weird indie sort of edge to it. Amazing script. So there's a lot there. A very kind of, I suppose, highly renowned film in many ways. Does a lot of really interesting things. So one of the things that I suppose, from our perspective, the way that we sort of view films is thinking about the way in which they are dystopian, the way in which they portray dystopian society. This one actually isn't a dystopian film in the traditional sense. Rather, it's a film based in absolutely ordinary society where one thing is changed, the invention of this technology. But we thought we'd start with sort of thinking about what it would be like if we just sort of take the microcosm for a minute to have a technology like this, to have a technology where like you could remove people's memories. And yes, it's used for forgetting an unhappy breakup in the film. I think the doctor says that Clementine wasn't happy and she wanted to move on. But if it was something that was more widely available, what would the ramifications of that be? And why is like having memories kind of important? What do you think?
And speaking of it being more widely available, it is I mean, it's sort of in the movie, it's implicated in this sort of like medical clinical sense, which is just open to people. I guess it's a private sort of practitioner, you could say. So obviously, it's not necessarily open like the same way that I guess. Well, it's set in America anyway, but
Yeah,
it's sort of
exactly.
open
So,
the same way. But I mean, just thinking about a lot of the implications of like what you could do with memory, what you can like manipulate, because obviously they've erased memories, but then is there also in not just chopping out certain parts of your like stream of consciousness, but have they also edited bits together? It's what can you really do with this technology? But obviously in this alternative universe where this exists, like you can imagine all the sort of probably underground government sort of
yeah.
I don't know, manipulation of such a technology. And also how is it even sort of, green flagged ahead to sort of be distributed in the way that it is? It's just
Yeah, I
so
mean,
interesting.
we get a whole sort of vibe of it being a bit of a dodgy company, don't we? I mean, we'll talk
Yeah,
about this
that's
when we
true.
get into sort of the second section where we'll talk about the sort of medical
Mm.
ethics of it all. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if such a thing did exist, you can think of plenty of kind of nefarious
Mm.
uses for it, I think. Um,
100%. I mean, I think it's really well illustrated through talking about like how the technology could be abused. I think it's well illustrated with Elijah Wood's character, who we're just saying does a really great job of being this sort of really
yeah.
creepy. I wouldn't even say. Would you say a villain? I don't know, but in just sort of very
No,
like
just a bit of a creep, really. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
quite a normal guy, but just like
Oh,
makes your
just but
skin crawl.
still, yeah. Oh
Yeah.
god, awful. And also characters like Mary, but I guess again we'll sort of save that to the portion with the
Mm.
ethical concerns. But what do you think the actual implications of like erasing someone's memory and like maybe how that sort of intertwines with their identity and their experiences?
Yeah. I mean, we're made up, right, of the impact of like the accumulation of
Mm.
our past, and we access
Yes.
that through our memories. So, on the one hand, I'm sure we've all got memories that we would want to forget.
Mm.
And I think, I guess, traumatic relationship breakups,
Mm.
particularly, I mean, ones that are far worse than the sort of relationship breakup that we see in the film, which is not,
Yes.
it doesn't involve sort of violence or
No.
cheating or anything like that, as far as we're aware. But in situations where people have encountered something traumatic, then yes, I can see why there might be an absolute desire to
Yeah.
remove that. But as you say, we're made up of good and bad things. We learn from past mistakes, and I'm not sure that I necessarily would say that it's healthier to sort of suggest erasing trauma
Mm.
rather than working through trauma.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of this is sort of, I've read my, fair share of self-help books talking about trauma, but I think there is still sort of this idea that trauma can have like an effect on the body itself, and especially
Yeah.
the way that you can obviously having gone through something and then encountering maybe like a similar feeling or sort of a similar situation can trigger, the body's sort of fight or flight response. And I don't know, for example, if necessarily erasing the root of that trauma would erase
Raise that.
that
Yeah.
like response into like a perceived threat, which yeah, I don't know. But again, I guess it's not something that you can really since we don't have this technology
No, we
necessarily.
don't. But if we think about
But
the film, the
mm,
very fact that essentially Clem and Joel don't remember each other, meet again, and their whole relationship starts again
yes.
as they from scratch, sort of suggests that any legacy of the memory erasure doesn't
Mm.
include the prevention of the same events
And
happening
that's
again.
true. Yeah,
So,
I mean, for this specific event, that's
mm,
yeah, exactly. And I guess there's this sort of idea of like using history and using what's happened in the past to learn and move
mm,
forward. That's exactly the thing that's not happened here. Is
yeah,
that they sort of meet again and fall down the same system. I mean, there's
mm,
a yeah. So yeah, at the beginning and then at the end of the film, it's explained that after the memory erasure, the two meet again, and then sort of start spending time with one another, and they find out about this memory erasure, and have these sort of reactions that are quite confused and surprised. I think there's definitely sort of a psychological effect. I mean, especially I don't know if anyone here sort of gotten drunk, ended up blacking out, and the next day not remembering anything about what happened, and it's sort of, I think that exact sort of confusion.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty sort of terrifying. And we see, there's that, obviously Joel is wrestling, with things that have happened that he doesn't remember, and there's a gap. So I'm not sure that replacing something that you want to forget with kind of a hole in your memories is necessarily a very attractive idea. And I also think, if we take that bigger picture, I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking of kind of my worst ever relationship breakup, and it, serious trauma following it, and it was cheating, there was gaslighting, it was really, really nasty, and it's taken me a lot of therapy to really realize that. But would I necessarily change it, get rid of it, like strip it from my memory?
Yeah.
Well, there was loads of things that I learned from that relationship. I learned more about myself, I got into certain like artists and books, and like experienced certain things. I don't think I'd want to lose those. But obviously, there's much worse trauma out there that perhaps people would feel that they just can't cope with the memories, and I wouldn't want to sort of speak for others there, but it feels to me like an oversimplification of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, like how I think I was sort of looking into different aspects of, going through trauma and these sort of, mental illnesses and stuff that can, you can sort of collate from that. Is I think there's people who go through these traumatic experiences don't necessarily have an understanding that there are other people that go through, not particularly on purpose as sort of, a very sort of self focused thing, but genuinely maybe, there's not necessarily the comprehension that this experience has been gone through by someone else, and it can be a very sort of isolating venture in that sense. And maybe that's if
the majority of people were having this wiped from their memories, that would be even more the case. You wouldn't have the tools and resources around you. There's a part of me that also thought, though, that this idea of kind of losing memories is somewhat of the zeitgeist. I was listening to a podcast, but I can't remember which one, something that was talking about the sort of way in which we are consciously or unconsciously forgetting events from recent history, or not learning to remember them correctly, insofar as when you add together a sort of loss of living memory with the rise of disinformation and the sort of availability of fake news and a failure to sort of distinguish, we start to lose the reality of what actually happened. And we talked about this, I think, when we were doing Years and Years, and at the beginning you have the nuclear attack on Hongsha-dang, and then you get the idea that it didn't really happen, or whatever, and the fact that statistically there's more and more, not necessarily Holocaust denial, but because of the fact that it's becoming more and more distant in memory, people feel like less and less, I suppose, connected with facts. And so I think the statistics on the Holocaust are now widely sort of disbelieved among young people, particularly in America, but not exclusively. They've done the research on this, and it's a reminder that memory is vital. It feels to me like, okay, we were going to be cheery, but I've been thinking a lot about the rise of authoritarianism this week. Really, really good deep dive by the newsagents on this, that you get the rise of authoritarianism and the sort of populist and far right parties. Well worth listening to from the last week. So this would be the week before Christmas, because we're recording this early. So I'd recommend that. But actually thinking, well, how likely is it that we could get back on a path that leads to, if not a repetition of the Holocaust, certainly a repetition of the kind of behaviours that happen when you other people, and particularly, the attitude to immigrants and the rise in language that reflects kind of early 20th century fascism and Hitler in particular. So if we don't remember, then these things can happen again because they don't have a reality. And you can completely imagine that if you've got memories that impact on some crazy authoritarian leader's decision on what they're going to do, the idea of sort of systematically stripping that from the consciousness of a people, if you had the technology to do that, that could be devastating. I mean, we were talking briefly about Doctor Who before this started, because I'm now in my sort of new season of Doctor Who pre-Christmas rewatch, and one of the things that they play around with this is the idea of basically rewritten history, the idea that everybody would forget that the Sontarans hadn't always ruled over Earth or whatever. And it's a very light-hearted example, unless you've been killed by a Sontaran. But it matters. It matters that the true events, whether on a personal or like a population level, a world level, matters.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about almost the subjectivity of history and how, like, things all sort of written from the basic sort of theory that everything's sort of written from the winner's perspective, or I mean, even for example, applying it to like a relationship sense, there's two people who are involved in a relationship, and when that split sort of happens, do you think there's a sort of disparity between how Clementine and Joel sort of view the end of this relationship, and whether one of them thinks the other's more at fault, or what really happened? Because obviously you can't necessarily experience something from another person's perspective. I don't know. I
think any listener who has ever been to couples counselling will know that is basically, I think, how it goes. You discover that two of you have completely different, well, in my case, couples counselling didn't work out. So, really different like perspectives on what's wrong with the relationship. And you're right. Okay, so there's obviously subjectivity because of how one feels within that. There are also, potentially objective facts, and I suppose that the idea about, for Joel and Clementine, they don't communicate well, and therefore their differences in how they see the relationship are something that we see as the viewer, but that they don't necessarily communicate to one another. Clementine always saying everything that she feels or whatever. And Joel never saying anything, and we hear it all in like his head, as it were. I think that's true. I suppose when you come to history, I've got really mixed views on this, because I'm very, very wary that if we start talking about kind of subjectivity, then you're at risk of sort of saying any view goes. But I also think that it's really important that we don't forget the fact that subjectivity is present, because storytelling, this is one of my sort of pet projects. I don't recommend anyone read the book that I wrote about it, but I wrote about the idea of storytelling for propaganda in late Latin poetry, very niche. But the idea that actually what survives for us looking at history is the source materials, and the source materials want to tell a certain story. Now, some of those source materials may be merely factual, I suppose, if you're looking at kind of primary evidence and so on. But a lot of what we have is, of course, shaped by the story that people want to tell. And as you say, victors and privileged voices have louder voices than those who are defeated. So, to go back to sort of the example of the Holocaust, we need to look at objective fact, but I think we also do need to look at the stories that were told by various sides. The idea of a story that was told about the Jews by the Nazi Party and the sort of consequence of that's not a fact about the Jewish people. It's a story about the Jews that leads to the anti-Semitism that continues to be rife today, and that of course we've seen a significant rise in during the current conflict between Israel and Hamas. So I think that there is importance to consider the way that subjectivity affects our view of history, whilst also recognizing that you can't get away from factual evidence as well. But stories are a lot more powerful. So we've got to tell the stories that are situated within the facts.
Yeah.
Lecture over.
Yeah.
What do you think about kind of the way that people, I suppose, engage with the past, whether personal or general? Do you think that that's something that's becoming more problematic?
I mean, I think there's a sort of not, I mean, just the past, but I think that maybe there's a bit of a loss of like general sort of media literacy and like understanding why, for example, certain things were made and like what they sort of like commentate about in the past. I mean, I think that's something, maybe one of my 2024 resolutions is to sort of question a lot more things, especially what I consume and its like relation. Yeah, I definitely think it's very topical to sort of think about what I mean, especially what is going on with current conflicts. There's sort of a lot of people are paralleling past genocides and how there's a lot of similar parallels here. But yeah, I think it's sort of an important thing to discuss at the moment.
No, I was just going to say that thinking about kind of the film and what we were saying about this idea of communication and listening to different sides and understanding that, I think that much as we said, there's sort of objective fact and there's, values that we might prioritize as an individual or as a society, but there is also something about understanding different people's perspectives, that we know things like the way that, for example, social media and internet algorithm and things like that creates a existence within a bubble.
See, interestingly enough, I was recently sort of reading about this, watching some YouTube videos, and that like the idea of this bubble isn't necessarily as true as people say. Obviously, I think there's this sort of phenomenon of, like certain things are more pushed towards you than others, but in fact the world has never been more sort of connected in terms of alternative views than it ever has been before, sort of in comparison to a time where we weren't, because I mean, yeah, of course it's true there's certain things that are pushed to me, but when I sort of, I go through BBC articles and go into comments on certain topics, like I actually, you see quite a lot of alternative views, some informed, some uninformed, some not, I mean, some, I could sort of, there's it, I actually, which I thought was quite an interesting sort of discussion that I came across. I think it might be worth doing some more research into this, but I think it is actually
we could put some references into the show notes, which we are going to do so much better in 2024 rather than me hammering them out in 30 seconds. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. If we think about this idea that mostly in the past, people's sort of exposure to other viewpoints was confined to the socials in which circles in which they moved, sort of socially, family, work, and perhaps the reading of one newspaper, the listening to one radio station or TV channel. And now we do have access to a far greater range of these things, and globalization, has allowed us perhaps to see different perspectives in a way that we didn't before. So I think that that's a really interesting sort of point of view. And I also think that you say something else, which is that, to say that it's important to consume a wide range of kind of viewpoints isn't to say that all viewpoints are valid.
Yes.
My sister said to me, "Oh, how do you know that you're not sort of, just consuming your media in an echo chamber?" And I think by that she means that, yes, I listen and read a wide range of sources, but they're likely to be centre and centre left sources. I'm not going to necessarily start reading the Daily Mail because I don't think that it's a credible source. So, hopefully not many of our listeners are Daily Mail readers. We don't mean to offend you if you are, but you're probably listening to the wrong podcast.
Indeed.
So I mean, there's something really interesting here, I think, exploring this idea kind of about memory, and we thought a little bit about the kind of the big quotations that are used in the film, One of them is quoted by Mary Kirsten Dunst as the secretary from Lacuna Inc., where this process is carried out, and she's also in a relationship with one of the technicians. And she quotes Nietzsche saying, "Blessed are the forgetful, for they get the better even of their blunders." Almost the idea, I think, there that you don't know about your mistakes, you don't learn from your mistakes, you continue to think yourself without fault. Possibly, I haven't actually looked into the background of this Nietzsche quotation. That would probably have been sensible. Felt a bit early on Saturday for reading Nietzsche. Have you learned about Nietzsche today?
Oh God, you know what? Like, other than what I've heard about, God is dead and
yeah,
the
that's
will
right.
to powers, which, another 2024 sort of
read more Nietzsche.
Read more Nietzsche. Read more Nietzsche. Although actually, I think he talks a bit about. Does he talk about the idea of the eternal reoccurrence and sort of infinite cycles? I mean, so I was going to say one of the theories about what happens in the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is that Joel and Clementine basically get stuck in this constant loop of basically getting together, experiencing relationship, erasing each other, and then starting again, and that sort of continues for the rest of their lifetime. Which I think some people sort of debate is like whether that really happens, since
But it has the potential, doesn't it?
Has the potential, yeah. Which is interesting to think about this sort of cycle. I mean, and especially I think one of the biggest things in relationship is, in relationships, moving past certain issues is breaking cycles of behavior and trying to, cooperatively sort of help each other to get better. Yeah, no, well, what do you think of that theory?
Well, I think that I can see why that idea that basically you get then to relive the good bits, and just as it starts to go sour, you kind of go back to day one. Everyone goes through the honeymoon period over and over. You can see the appeal of that. But in a way, I think that you would hope that they would, once they knew about the process, having had it, that would put off having it done again. I would also imagine that the company is going to be in serious trouble following the whistleblowing episode. So, whether this is feasible or not.
Of course, yeah. Well, I guess, yeah, and that is indeed quite true. I mean, should we talk a little bit about, with the whistleblowing, the sort of medical ethics of this process and Mary's behaviour?
Just before we do that, can I say two more things? One was about the Nietzsche. One was I was thinking about something that we didn't mention about this idea about kind of like wanting people to forget your mistakes. And I think that one of the things that we as a society are becoming increasingly bad at is allowing people to make mistakes and be forgiven for them. I mean, in public life particularly, but I think on a personal level as well. Like, we've sort of started thinking that change is bad. And I was listening to an interview the other day with John Bercow, the previous Speaker of the House of Commons. A man who, widely disliked by many people. But what I really enjoyed about this interview with him was him basically having gone into politics really on a sort of worryingly kind of right-wing edge, quite sort of, part of kind of racist wings of the Conservative Party, having gone in this huge arc to where he now identifies as being on the left. He's no longer conservative, and he is standing up and basically saying, I am ashamed of how wrong I was. I have learned, I have changed. And I just thought how rare it is, like in a time when we don't forgive politicians for changing their minds. And I'm not sure that we actually forgive even people we know, even though we might want them to change to like our point of view. And then if they do, it's like they've sort of failed somehow.
There's a huge thing about people admitting that they're wrong, and this sort of and almost like that's, people hate sort of admitting, sort of maybe like weaknesses in their judgment or whatever. And especially the way that we do treat people when we have disagreements and when we have arguments it just makes it even more difficult for for like people to sit there and realize, oh, okay, I can actually sit here and say I'm wrong, and that my mind has been changed, but without sort of their previous sort of thoughts and ethics being held over their head. You know, it's kind of it's hard. I don't think people can are willing to necessarily give someone a clean slate in the same sense,
which, you know, makes sort of people's self-improvement and things very, very difficult. And I think, you know, again, if we're thinking about sort of Joel and Clementine, they, you know, end the film with this kind of awareness of what they each thought of one another by the time that they ended the relationship and had their memories wiped. And you sort of hope that that's, I guess, a healthier start for them both in terms of their self-awareness and their awareness of the relationship with the other. That, I suppose, is sort of optimistic reading, rather than that they have their minds wiped every 2 years. So I mean, so you mentioned there the kind of this thing about medical ethics and the way that it plays out in the film. I think this is a good direction to go in next. So we've touched on a couple of things to do with Patrick, to do with Mary. But overall, what did you think of the process and the way that it's portrayed, and Lacuna Inc. As a company?
I mean, it seems quite, I think it's portrayed to be very sketchy in general. I mean, I don't think necessarily the people behind the company seem unlikable. I think we get to explore sort of, except from Elijah Wood's character, he's, well, as we said, a little bit creepy. Patrick. I think Stan and Mary and even the sort of doctor. Is he a doctor? Do we know?
He is doctor. He is doctor. I've forgotten his surname, but Howard is his first name.
Yeah, no. You know, sure, might have taken the Hippocratic Oath, but, you know, sort of clearly. So what happens within the film, I don't know if for the listeners, is Mary is one of a sort of girl who works at the practitioner. This like memory erasure happens, and she's dating Stan, who's one of the sort of assisting doctors in the process. And during the erasure of Joel's memory of Clementine, she comes along to help out Stan and Patrick, who's also sort of works at this, you know, Stan and Patrick work at this practitioner as well. And eventually there are some issues within the erasure of Joel's memory, and the doctor comes over, and Mary's sort of almost obsessed and infatuated with this doctor, and it's revealed to us that Howard and the doctor had affairs in the past, where her memory has been erased. I don't know if we said multiple times, but
I don't think it's clear. We get it. She listens back to one version, but this is, you know, it's revealed in a really traumatic way. In that particular instance, Howard's wife turns up because she's suspicious that he's gone off in the middle of the night. He has in fact gone off to work to help sort out the fact that Joel is disappearing into his own mind, trying to stop the process, something else we can talk about. But she turns up, she sees the two of them kissing through the window, and she says to Mary, "Oh, you can have him, you already did." And then it becomes apparent that actually this affair,
so clever.
It is, and it's a real sort of insight into, well, I suppose the issues of consent and the issues of the imbalance of power that's created as well, because Howard knows what happened, his wife knows what happened, Mary doesn't know what happened, and we get the impression, listening back to her taped interview before the procedure, that she didn't really want it to be done. And he's sort of saying, and bearing in mind he's her boss, he's an older man, he's clearly has the greater power in the affair. He's sort of saying, no, we agreed that it's for the best.
Yes, I mean, there's sort of there's the idea of consent and whether she was sort of coerced into this decision making. I mean, really, it's just very generally quite unprofessional. I don't know, sort of having an affair with one of your sort of superiors. I mean, I guess I don't know. And just sort of
I mean, I think that in this situation, clearly Howard is the
Yeah,
responsible
100%. Yeah.
party, and there's already something very dodgy going on there. Although, speaking of professionalism, you said that Mary went over to the flat during the
Oh,
procedure,
yeah.
Joel's flat,
Oh,
to
of
help
course.
out. But was she really there to help
Yeah, I
out? I
mean, they
mean,
stole his alcohol.
basically,
Probably, I think, what did they
yep,
smoke some weeds? Lots of
yeah,
professional
absolutely.
conduct going on around
Yeah,
there.
and while Joel is unconscious on his bed, bearing in mind he can
Yeah.
hear filtering into his memories what's going on in the
Mm.
room. They're basically dancing in their underwear
Oh,
and getting stoned. So they're not even looking at the screen at the
no.
point at which they think the procedure's gone
Yes,
wrong.
exactly. Which
Patrick
Patrick
disappears.
does disappear.
He's not even present, so there are two people there to watch over it. So,
Mm.
it's highly unprofessional in the sort of, I guess it created a really uncomfortable sense of vulnerability
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
patient, which of course we had seen had been manipulated for
Yes.
Clementine.
Yeah. So sort of the concept of like abuse of this technology is illustrated well in Patrick's
Mm.
storyline, where he basically falls in love with Clementine and,
Falls in
well,
love, I shall put in inverted covers, because she was
yes,
unconscious
indeed.
at the
Well,
time.
he gains an infatuation with a poor unconscious woman that is, again, just incredibly uncomfortable. But sort of this comes into where the sort of security and privacy concerns are relevant. Because not only does he violate sort of these boundaries between like a patient and like a practitioner, but also starts using Joel's memories for his own personal gain, and malicious intent.
Oh, it's just it's creepy. But when he's like quoting
Oh gosh,
lines, Joel's
terrible.
lines back at her, and it's only just really
Yeah,
satisfying because it doesn't work.
exactly. I mean, do you think? Because like I think as well as this experience, as Patrick quotes back these lines, I think like Clementine still has some sort of remnant memory about these experiences, because it feels like she's having these sort of adverse reactions to it, like it feels
Yes.
incorrect to her.
So yes, it makes sense if we imagine that expressions of emotion, things that people say, they're associated with the individual person. It doesn't work just to put them into the mouth of another
Yeah.
person and to expect them to have the same effect. Although there is that heart-wrenching moment when Patrick gives her the Valentine's gift that
Oh gosh.
Joel had
Oh,
bought for her.
terrible.
And she's like, oh, no one I've been with has
Oh
ever bought me a
god.
piece of jewellery that I actually
Oh
liked. She's like, oh.
no, because it is like they don't. I'm not. I mean, do you think Joel and Clementine are a bad couple?
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I think that one of the things that we see as we go back through the memories is that overwhelmingly they're good, and I know we could say, okay, it goes back into sort of earlier stages of their relationship and so on, but even in the later stages, they have arguments, but the problem is that they don't resolve their arguments. They don't communicate well. Not that there aren't good things going on as well. And actually, it's even in moments that we might not think are particularly sort of brilliant that Joel still wants to keep the memories. So I don't know. I think that there's obviously a problem in what Clementine says on her interview, where she basically says, that she doesn't feel like she's able to be herself anymore. But overall, I think that what she's kind of getting at is not necessarily to do with her relationship with Joel. I mean, there are obviously some problems with that
Yes.
relationship, but not necessarily insurmountable ones. And with Joel, he's just like, oh, she's not educated enough. She says library instead of library, and and she's like, oh, he's boring. These are the sorts of things that just happen when you don't continue to kind of, I suppose, grow together. But there are also the things that happen if you've been in a relationship for a while and you don't continue to work at it and so on. So I don't know, would they be better together or not together? I suppose we're supposed to think potentially that there's something really special bonding them, otherwise they wouldn't start over. But it just feels pretty normal to me for a relationship that might last, might not.
I mean, what do you think of the sort of at the beginning of the movie? The both sort of individuals end up in Montauk, which I think is where they met originally. And there was like,
yeah.
Do you think there was maybe what do you think pulled them? Do you think there was sort of almost commenting on like a fated aspect to their relationship? Not that that's sort of the main ideas going on here, that they're meant to be, but that's sort of, they do yeah, they both sort of, and they're almost calls to this location.
I suppose one of the things that it raises is this idea that, you for all the sort of concept of kind of mapping a person through your memory, everything is interconnected within your thoughts and memories. So, I mean, firstly, like when Joel is going through the erasure process, Clementine in his memory says, "Meet me in Montauk," and then that sort of lingers. But there's also this idea of, like, this is a place that she goes to regularly. We're told that she says to the waitress, it's her home from home, whatever. It's a place that has the potential to, I suppose, linger as of significance to him. He just doesn't know why it is significant anymore. So when he has that whim to get on a train and not go to work, that's where he goes to. Not necessarily because of her, but because it acknowledges the idea that, there's a gap, there's a sort of, something that has meaning without any, it's like the signified without the signifiers. There's nothing around it to provide it with the context.
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah, maybe they are supposed, they are trying to say something about kind of the bond between them and so on.
I mean, what do you think of, I think there's quite a lot in the film about dreams, and so the way that Joel's memory is erased is he sort of falls asleep and, again, very creepily. Does he, like, very creepily, Patrick and Stan break into his flat and, like, press him up? Is this as he consent? Does he know this is how it happens? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another very good question. I mean, it's quite odd that, you'd have a medical procedure in your own bed, but I suppose if you didn't, you'd wake up in like a clinic or something, and you would, you wouldn't know why you were there.
Yeah, I guess sort of defeats the whole.
I sort of get that, but yeah, I mean, obviously it feels very sort of, underhand, but it fits, I think, with this idea that the whole thing feels a little bit like everybody's underinformed.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of being informed on this procedure, I think there's a sort of, your memories are like erased through an almost dreamlike sequence, and it's very sort of mind bending and a bit surrealist and stuff. But, do you think there's even a potential, with the sort of causes of like loss of identity, and maybe like, do you think there's a danger that people who undergo this process could have sort of a loss of like disconnection from reality, maybe even like a sort of development of psychosis?
Well, if you don't know why, like with Joel, he doesn't know why his car is damaged.
Yeah.
We know from the memory that it's because Clementine drove it drunk. Overall, we don't, there are things that disconnect for him. And I guess like the significance of Montauk, not knowing why it was significant, or like, exactly. Those sorts of things. I think that would have its own complications.
Yeah.
But, the very fact that this clinic will, Clementine says, you know me, I'm impulsive. I just decided to go and get it done. And Joel is obviously in a really kind of emotional state when he's found out. He's not supposed to have found out, but he's found out that Clementine has had this procedure because friends and family basically have to be complicit. They, get their little card saying this person has had so-and-so erased from their memory, and so you mustn't ever speak to them about it again. Yeah. And he finds out. So I mean, that's again has kind of real ethical consequences, basically kind of trying to force people to collude in this. It feels like the impact of having this process is quite minimalized in the way that it's depicted. Not that it's sort of shown to be a kind of money-making corporation or anything like that, but I don't feel that sort of due diligence is not really done with regard to assessing the suitability for the patient and that sort of thing. All we hear, I think, is that Mary says on the phone to somebody, no, you can't have it more than 3 times in 1 month. Like, people would just become addicted to erasing, like, oh no, I did something really embarrassing last week, I need to erase it. So I think that it raises all sorts of kind of questions about whether an ethics committee would pass something like this. Yeah. And, again, you feel like the very fact that Patrick gets away with stealing all of the stuff, the notes and the items crazy. And things, it's a good indicator of why medical waste must be well handled and things like that. But then also, he stole a pair of Clementine's knickers from the flat when he was there as well. So just generally, this guy probably shouldn't be in any kind of job involving vulnerable people, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, we mentioned already that Mary, having found out that she has had this procedure done,
Yes.
then blows the whistle. And this is another really interesting kind of ethical bit. You know, she quits her job, she takes all of the patient files, and she writes to all of them, sending them their files and the tape recording of their interviews. Now, like, for the purposes of the narrative, this works brilliantly because, you know, Clementine has just met Joel again, doesn't know who he is, and suddenly she's playing a tape explaining why she wants him to be erased from her memory. But actually, like, as an action, do you think that there's any justification for what Mary does?
I mean, I'm not sure how sort of like medical private data is meant to be handled, but I think sending
not like that,
tape through the post is actually, I don't know, I'm not sure about that one, but no,
GDPR, big problem, you know, we're Data Protection Act.
Literally, is whether, you know, I guess it's the sort of question whether Mary's whistleblowing is really going to bring, I don't know, we don't know whether there's other such clinics out there somewhere operating. There must be. I guess it's not really like a secret sort of operation or secret technology.
Yeah, it's not clear. They sort of suggest that Howard's like the pioneer, but
yeah,
I mean, I don't know. Unless, of course, it is so like unethical that he can't really propagate his patent.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether necessarily her action is going to sort of, you know, it'd be interesting to see whether it really brought about any sort of questions or actual sort of change, and whether this sort of stops this procedure from like continuing. But would it really decrease the demand of? Because
that's the thing. Because if he had it,
I mean, I guess what, like, maybe, I guess maybe Lacuna as a company is meant to sort of describe, you know, society's general kind of desire to ignore traumatic experiences and not necessarily, you know, I guess it's just this sort of idea of like constant pleasure and not necessarily sitting with things that aren't pleasurable or that can be traumatic and that can be painful. It's sort of like the refusal to do so, and maybe that's sort of what the company represents. But
however, you would have thought that just receiving that without any kind of
context,
prior warning or anything, you know, that would be hugely traumatizing, wouldn't it? So
especially because I guess it's easy for Joel and Clementine, you know, sort of Joel's been erased for all of like 2 days, Clementine sort of, I don't know, maybe like 2 weeks, whatever. But what about people who had this experience, you know, years ago, and then suddenly there's this sort of, I don't know, because it wasn't only just people who erased their memories of a relationship. I think there's a woman who wanted to erase, you know, her old cat or something, which, you know, is, I feel like is less of a big one. But what if it was, I don't know, something really quite traumatic?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and just receiving a letter to say that this has been erased,
to you, know,
I think Mary acts in a very kind of vindictive way, I think, really, rather than really thinking about the, you know, we think of it as largely being positive for Clementine and Joel, but actually the very fact that they hear each other's tapes is obviously a bit of a fluke, but that was a private consultation that then got exposed to another party, you know. So you know, I tend to feel fairly confident about privacy of data in say the NHS, whatever, but I'm probably worked for the NHS for a while, a long time ago, at the point at which they were trying to create the NHS spine, which of course failed, but at the time I was really pro because I saw the benefits outweighing the sort of concerns. But you know, there is the potential, even you know, now that everything's digital and everything, for access to medical data being abused and those sorts of things, even if you don't just like carry all the files out of your office and put them in your car. So you know, it's something that's worth thinking about. One of the things we haven't really talked about, although we talked about whether we thought it was a good relationship, is this overall idea about kind of what part the relationship has in their lives. Because I think one of the things that is a little bit dystopian or resonates with some of the dystopian landscapes that we've looked at is this idea of kind of an emptiness to their respective lives, to Joel and Clementine's lives and the way in which they do or don't kind of fill that emptiness.
Yes.
And one of the things I thought happened with the sort of, once things start to go sour, you just erase it, is that it fits with kind of a potential increasing idealization of relationships.
Yeah.
And we're saying, this is 20 years ago, so 2004, early days of social media and things like that. Do you think that people over idealize relationships, and that that's sort of something that
definitely
Clementine and Joel are doing?
I think Jim Carrey's character is definitely sort of, he reminds me of like people that I also know in my life who sort of seek relationships as also sort of a means to an end to increase their own sort of happiness and purpose.
Yes, put their happiness into the hands of somebody else. Yeah, make someone else responsible.
I think also that affects other areas of your life, such as the friendships that you may have, and I don't know. I also think it's sort of, I mean, I'm not really sure what it was like in the sort of pre social media era of technology, but especially the way that relationships are portrayed as like the be all and end all now also puts people who don't necessarily fall into relationships as easily as others sort of put a lot of their sort of self-worth on how desirable they feel, and I think also promotes like a sense of unhappiness. But I think they were sort of that both Clementine and Joel are sort of portrayed as unhappy. Well, I think especially Joel is portrayed as unhappy and unfulfilled, whilst I actually think Clementine has a bit of a, I think we had a bit of a quote here, too many guys think I'm a concept or I complete them. I'm gonna make them alive, but I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours. I remember, and then Joel goes to say, I remember that speech really well. And then she says, I had you pegged, didn't I? You had, and he goes on, you had the whole human race pegged. And then Joel continues to say, I still thought you were going to save my life, which is, what do you think about that? I don't know, how does...
I think that is something that happens a lot in, I think, certain types of relationships. I think maybe from my experience, there's a certain sort of, perhaps I'd say more kind of unhappy men who feel that a woman will fulfill them, but I don't know whether it happens the other way as well. But this idea, it's interesting because Clementine says pretty much like a similar but shorter version of the speech the second time round when she and Joel are standing in the corridor at the very end of the film. So this is obviously something that's really sort of important to her to sort of say. But it's interesting, isn't she? Because I think that she is lost in other ways. In the original script, but I don't think it makes it into the film, when I was reading it earlier, when she says that she's been a book slave at Barnes and Noble for 5 years, she's like, oh my God, I've been there for 5 years. Do you have a cell phone? I need to ring them right now and quit. So she's got a certain loss there. She says that she pastes her personality on with like hair dye.
Oh yes.
There's something there. Joel accuses her of, he says, you fuck other people to make them like you, or you dangle the possibility of it in front of them. But that seems to be just his jealousy. They don't seem to have any evidence. She certainly denies that this is something that she does. And in fact, she says to him in the bookstore just after they first met, when he's remembering that, at the same time as the speech, that he's not married, but he's in a cohabitation with Naomi, his partner of 2 years or something at that point. And she's like, no, you have to commit to me. So she's actually got a fairly sort of monogamous idea, it seems, about relationship, and not messing up his relationship. So I think that there's something with her where one of their arguments in the memories is where she suddenly says she wants to have a baby, and he's like, are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility? And she feels patronized. But on the other hand, he's the guy who do you remember when they're sitting in the Chinese restaurant in the memory? And
he sort of says, he talks about the way that they're perceived.
Here we go. Dinner at Kang's again. Are we like those poor couples you feel sorry for in restaurants? Are we the dining dead? I can't stand the idea of us being a couple people think that about. I like that. How's the chicken? Good. More? No, thank you. She's going to be drunk and stupid now. Was hearing all of this stuff in his head that he doesn't say out loud, whereas she does say, to clean the goddamn hair off the soap when you're done in the shower. And it's like, it's really gross. It's gross. and he's not engaging in the kind of what actually matters to him. Which is similar to the bit where she accuses him of not sharing with her, not like communicating with her, and he's like, talking incessantly is not the same as communicating. So this is obviously a problem in their relationship, but it's also a surmountable problem, right? Potentially, if they want it to be.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's any relationship where one person is more outgoing than the other person. Perhaps, if there's a different in their kind of education, he says, oh, you can't really talk to her about books and things like that. Maybe this means they're not very compatible. But on the other hand, when he's bawling his eyes out in his car, you definitely feel like he's lost something. Whether it's something good or not is unclear. But I don't know. I felt that there was really something about whilst in relationships you might want to make should want to make the other person happy or not make them unhappy. As an individual, you shouldn't put your happiness, make it the sole responsibility of somebody else. And I think that's quite a common issue, perhaps particularly in the kind of empty lives. I suppose Joel says, doesn't he? He says something about like how his my life isn't that interesting. I go home. I go to work, I go home, I don't know what to say, you should read my journal, it's just like blank. But of course it wasn't blank until the pages got ripped out that featured her. So, maybe they do good things for each other. Did you pick up the reference to Tom Waits? So they mentioned the reference to Blue Rain. It's the colour of her hair dye, and it's also the name for a type of cheap gin. And but in the original script, it mentioned the fact that it comes from a Tom Waits song called Ninth and Hennepin. Like, is it really sad that the reference is gone from the film, really? I mean, it's obviously a little bit niche, but just because the text, like the lyrics of that are so like appropriate to the whole thing. I don't know, are you a Tom Waits fan? Do you
I can't say I've listened to much Tom Waits.
Tom Waits is amazing. So I've added Ninth and Hennepin to the to our music playlist that goes to this podcast. When we reference songs, we put them there. But this is one of his ones where he's just like, it's more like he's like speaking a poem over music. It's not like not him singing in his amazing kind of cigarette-y voice, but the lyrics are really like kind of encapsulate that idea of sort of an empty life, a sort of like a point of sort of limbo in your existence and things like that. But at the end it says, and the clock ticks out like a dripping faucet till you're full of rag water and bitters and blue ruin, and you spill out over the side to anyone who'll listen. I've seen it all through the yellow windows of the evening train. I was just like, that's so good.
Really good.
So so everybody listen to that. Everybody listen to Tom Waits. He's great.
And also speaking a bit about music, just wanted to like point out, big fan of John Brian's work on the soundtrack. Just really good. I mean he's like works with other musicians such as like Fiona Apple and Rufus Wainwright. But just it's one of those soundtracks that you continue to go back to.
There's some very good stuff, isn't there? Yes.
I think one of my favorite musicians, Puma Blue, samples one of the tracks "Phone Call" from the movie, which we can also put on the playlist.
There you go. Put it on the playlist.
But
super.
Yeah, definitely recommend those. Just whilst we're on the topic of music, definitely one of my favorite things.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely creates the real kind of like
sort of
ambience
beats.
of the whole thing. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, there we go. We've done a little bit of a tour through some of the big ideas, some of the sort of good things about the film. Anything that you think is a takeaway from this film? It's not quite as sort of like messagey as some of our others, but
I guess it's a very sort of general commentary about human relationships and
Mm.
memory, and sort of, I guess, there's sort of overcoming, I guess, through Joel's experience of this memory erasure and going through all the memories of his time with Clementine, he overcomes the pain that he once felt. I guess it is that sort of processing that he goes through in that experience. And he almost comes out of it wanting to try again.
So if it hadn't been erased, that process would have been the best thing for him. But actually, a process that took you through those memories rather than a process that erased those memories.
And he sort of came out of it
really
sort of experiencing a renewed sort of I remember, maybe this is Claire, maybe this is the sort of endeavor that we need to start researching. We can start over.
Absolutely.
But I think it has, I think for me it definitely has a huge sort of emotional depth, and also just visually and cinematically it's just one of my favorite films.
And the other thing I would say about it is that it's very funny, not necessarily in that kind of like, laugh out loud kind of jokes funny, but
sort of vibes,
so if people are thinking kind of, I'm not seeing this, it's got Jim Carrey in it, do I really want to watch Jim Carrey film? It's not that kind. He's playing it straight, with perhaps the one exception being when he's playing himself when he was 4, when he goes back into his memories. But I think there's a lot of sort of big ideas, speculative ideas, which are fun, but also just some really good performances. And we were saying, bearing in mind that Kate Winslet had hit massive fame in 97 with Titanic. Elijah Wood had just been Frodo Baggins for 3 years at this point, because it's the year after the end of the Lord of the Rings franchise. And Kirsten Dunst, sort of big kind of up and coming Hollywood sort of leading lady at that sort of time as well. And then playing these kind of like in this quirky film, playing roles that don't necessarily sort of conform to the kind of types that you might expect them to play. So a lot going for it, definitely. Okay, well, there we go. We've hit out into 2024 in style, and we're going to be back with you for episode 10 in 2 weeks' time. Episode 10, look at that. Which will be on The Society, which we've promised for a while, but we've actually now will have watched. And as always, please do follow us on social media, on Instagram. Check out our sister project, beingsociety.com, which looks at society and political philosophy and picks up on some of our ideas here. Email us at dystopianfictioncurrentaffairs@gmail.com. Let us know what it is you would like us to do more of, less of, possibly. We might not listen, but suggestions for content. And please do like and review us on your preferred podcast platform as well. It's really good for us to reach out to other people that way. One other thing I was going to say is that as it is a happy new year and you may wish to support the podcast, I'm pleased to report that our I don't even know how to say this, but Ko-fi donations link is alive again after it was. We were carefully informed that it was in fact broken. So I'm sure you were all trying to donate previously, but now you actually can. We are trying to avoid advertising on this podcast. We would like to be able to keep it nice and free from the bombardment of advertising that we get from everything. If you'd like to help us cover our costs, then a couple of quid would really help get us into 2024. If you would like to, thank you so much.
Giving spirit.
That's right, absolutely. Got no money left after Christmas. I'm so sorry. Please give it to us. So excellent. Thank you very much, Masha. I am going to press stop.